The summer of 2019 was in full swing in the quiet, tree-lined streets of Boulder, Colorado. Nestled at the base of the Rocky Mountains, it was a town where the air smelled like pine and the sunsets painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. For Josh and Sarah Lewis, it was supposed to be a season of fresh starts. They had just moved into their charming, craftsman-style home, complete with a wraparound porch and a small garden Sarah had been obsessively planting. On the surface, they were the picture-perfect couple, a thriving young family with their whole future ahead of them. Josh, a 35-year-old software engineer, was the kind of guy you'd call dependable. With his glasses perched on his nose and a slight scruff that Sarah jokingly referred to as his tech bro look. He was quiet, logical, and hardworking. He was the kind of man who meticulously planned things, whether it was their finances or their yearly family road trip. Sarah, on the other hand, was his opposite in many ways. Vibrant and outgoing, she lit up any room she walked into. At 33, her artistic background had led her to a career in interior design, where she thrived in creating spaces that told a story. But beneath their picturesque life lay the cracks that had begun to form. Their love story, once passionate and full of promise, had slowly started to feel like a series of routines. Sarah's design business was taking off, and she spent more time traveling to meet clients and overseeing projects. Josh, meanwhile, was pouring himself into his work, often staying up late to code and troubleshoot. Their conversations had dwindled from shared dreams and laughs to brief exchanges about grocery lists and home repairs. On one particular morning, the tension between them was palpable. Josh sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee while scrolling through his phone. Sarah breezed into the room, dressed in a flowing sundress, her laptop tucked under one arm. "Don't forget, I'm heading to Denver for that client meeting tonight," she said, grabbing a piece of toast. Josh nodded but didn't look up from his screen. "Got it. I'll pick up dinner for Max." Max was their 7-year-old son, a ball of energy and curiosity who loved Legos and soccer. "When are you back?" "Late. Don't wait up," Sarah replied, leaning down to peck him on the cheek. He turned his head slightly, and the kiss landed awkwardly on his jaw. As Sarah walked out the door, Josh felt a pang of something he couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger or sadness. It was a quiet longing for something that felt out of reach. He brushed it aside, focusing instead on the workday ahead. That evening, Josh sat on the couch, the TV playing softly in the background as Max built an elaborate Lego tower on the living room rug. The house felt too quiet without Sarah's laughter echoing in the halls. He glanced at the clock. It was nearing 10 p.m., and there was still no sign of her. He sent a quick text. "Everything okay?" Minutes turned into an hour without a response. Josh tried to shake off the nagging worry, convincing himself she was just busy or had lost track of time. When her car finally pulled into the driveway after midnight, he felt both relieved and annoyed. "Long meeting?" he asked as she walked through the door, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "Yeah," Sarah said, avoiding his gaze. The client had a million questions. Josh nodded but didn't press further. Something about her tone felt off, but he told himself he was imagining it. Over the next few weeks, the distance between them grew more pronounced. Sarah's late-night meetings became more frequent, and she started leaving her phone face down on the table, a small but noticeable change. Josh couldn't help but feel like he was losing her, but he didn't know how to bring it up without sounding paranoid or accusatory. One evening, while Sarah was out again, Josh decided to clean out the garage, a task he'd been putting off for months. Among the dusty boxes of old photo albums and holiday decorations, he found Sarah's sketchbook. It was something she used to carry everywhere, her ideas for projects and designs often spilling out in vibrant, detailed drawings. Curious, he flipped through the pages, smiling at the familiar sketches of furniture layouts and mood boards. But then, something caught his eye. Tucked between the pages was a small, folded piece of paper. It was a receipt from a fancy downtown restaurant in Denver, one he knew they hadn't visited together in years. The date on the receipt matched one of Sarah's recent late-night meetings. His heart sank. Josh tried to brush it off, reasoning that she could have met a client there. But doubt had already planted its seed. he started noticing other small inconsistencies. The way she'd come home with a faint trace of cologne on her clothes. The way her stories about her meetings sometimes changed when he asked follow-up questions. Determined to find answers, he decided to do something he'd never done before. Track her phone. It was a line he never thought he'd cross, but the suspicion was eating away at him. Using a simple app, he set up a location tracker on her device, convincing himself it was just to ease his mind. The following Thursday, Sarah announced she'd be working late again. After she left, Josh sat in his home office, staring at the blinking dot on the map. It wasn't moving toward her usual office downtown. Instead, it was heading to a residential neighborhood in a different part of the city. Josh felt his stomach twist. He told himself it could be nothing. Maybe she was meeting a client at their home. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. As the dots settled on an address, Josh opened Google Maps to see where she was. The image on the screen was of a modest, two-story house. It didn't look like a client's home. It looked like someone's personal residence. His hands trembled as he closed the app, unsure of what to do next. When Sarah came home that night, Josh was waiting for her in the kitchen. "How was work?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Exhausting," she replied, dropping her bag on the counter. "I'm going to take a shower." As she walked away, Josh's eyes followed her, his mind racing. The receipt, the cologne, the strange address, they were pieces of a puzzle he didn't want to finish. But he couldn't ignore the picture they were starting to form. Josh couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The strange address he'd seen on Sarah's tracker kept replaying in his mind like a broken record. That night, as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he felt the weight of the silence between them. Sarah had fallen asleep quickly, her back turned to him as usual. Josh wanted to ask her about the house, about the inconsistencies, but fear held him back. What if he was right? What if everything they'd built was a lie? The next morning, Sarah was up early, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. She seemed happy. Too happy, Josh thought. It was as though she was compensating for something. "Big plans today?" Josh asked, trying to keep his tone casual. "Just the usual," Sarah replied, pouring coffee into her favorite mug. "Meetings, project deadlines. You know how it is." He nodded, forcing a smile. But as she kissed him on the cheek and headed out the door, the questions swirling in his mind grew louder. He decided he couldn't live in limbo any longer. He needed answers. Josh spent the day in a haze, pretending to work while secretly digging deeper into Sarah's activities. He looked up the address from the tracker, cross-referencing it with public records. The house belonged to a man named Eric Thompson, a name Josh didn't recognize but couldn't ignore. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. If Sarah was lying to him, he deserved to know the truth. That evening, while Sarah was out at another meeting, Josh made a decision he never thought he'd make. He drove to the address. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where people kept their lawns immaculate and waved politely at strangers. Josh parked a few houses down and walked toward Eric's home, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt ridiculous, like some sort of amateur detective, but he couldn't turn back now. Through the living room window, he saw them. Sarah was sitting on the couch, laughing at something Eric said. She looked relaxed, at ease, more than she had in months. Eric was tall, with dark hair and an easy smile. The way he leaned towards Sarah, the way his hand brushed against hers, told Josh everything he needed to know. His world shattered in that moment. He stumbled back to his car, barely able to breathe. Driving home, he replayed the scene over and over in his mind, each detail cutting deeper than the last. The laughter, the casual intimacy, the way Sarah looked at Eric, like she used to look at him. The next few days were a blur. Josh couldn't bring himself to confront Sarah. Not yet. He needed to process what he'd seen to figure out his next move. But the distance between them grew more noticeable. Sarah continued with her late-night meetings, her cheery demeanor a sharp contrast to Josh's growing resentment. One night, as Sarah was getting ready for bed, Josh finally broke the silence. "Who's Eric?" he asked, his voice steady but cold. Sarah froze, her hand hovering over her jewelry box. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone too casual. "I mean the guy whose house you've been visiting," Josh replied. His eyes locked on hers. "The one you're always with when you're supposed to be at work." Her face went pale. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it, but then her shoulders sagged. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then explain it to me." Josh shot back, his anger bubbling to the surface. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what I think." Sarah hesitated, then sat down on the edge of the bed. "Eric is a friend. We've been working on a project together." "Cut the crap, Sarah," Josh snapped. "I saw you. I saw the way you looked at him. Do you think I'm stupid?" Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but Josh felt no sympathy. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Josh's heart sank. She wasn't denying it. She wasn't even trying to lie anymore. "How long?" he asked, his voice trembling. 6 months, Sarah admitted, tears streaming down her face. "But it didn't mean anything." "Don't you dare," Josh interrupted, his voice rising. "Don't you dare tell me it didn't mean anything. You've been lying to me, to Max. Do you even care what this is doing to us?" "Of course I care," Sarah cried. "But things haven't been the same between us for a long time. You're always working, always distracted. I felt invisible." Josh stared at her, his mind reeling. "So this is my fault?" he asked incredulously. "You cheated on me because I work hard to provide for our family? Because I trusted you?" "It's not that simple," Sarah said, her voice pleading. "I didn't plan for this to happen. It just did." Josh shook his head, his anger giving way to a deep, aching sadness. "You had a choice, Sarah, and you chose to betray me." The days that followed were tense and filled with silence. Sarah tried to act like things were normal, but Josh couldn't look at her without feeling a wave of pain and anger. He threw himself into work, using it as a distraction, but the betrayal lingered like a shadow. One evening, as Josh was tucking Max into bed, his son looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. "Daddy, why are you and Mommy so quiet lately?" he asked. Josh's heart broke. "Sometimes grown-ups have things to figure out," he said gently. "But don't worry, buddy. I love you, and that's never going to change." Max nodded, satisfied with the answer, and drifted off to sleep. But Josh stayed by his bedside for a long time, staring at his son and wondering how their family had come to this. Josh knew he couldn't keep living like this. He started seeing a therapist, hoping to find clarity in the chaos. Through their sessions, he began to understand that Sarah's actions weren't about him. They were about her. But that didn't make the betrayal any less painful. Meanwhile, Sarah tried to repair the damage, but her efforts felt hollow. She apologized constantly, promised to end things with Eric, and begged for a second chance. But Josh couldn't shake the image of her laughing with another man, couldn't forget the lies she'd told. One night, Sarah sat across from Josh at the dinner table, her eyes filled with desperation. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this," she said. "Please, Josh, don't give up on us." Josh looked at her, his emotions warring within him. He wanted to believe her, to believe that they could find their way back to each other. But the trust that had once held them together was gone, replaced by a chasm he wasn't sure they could bridge. If you've made it this far, thanks for sticking with me through this roller coaster of emotions. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more stories like this. Let me know in the comments what you do in Josh's situation. Can trust ever be rebuilt? Or is it better to move on? Stay tuned for the next part, where we'll see if Josh can find the strength to forgive, or if he'll choose a new path altogether. Josh couldn't ignore the ever-present tension. The air in the house felt thick, charged with unspoken words and lingering resentment. Every shared glance with Sarah was a reminder of what had been lost. Yet, despite everything, they danced around the real issue, both unwilling, or perhaps unable, to confront it head-on. But the storm brewing between them couldn't be contained forever. The breaking point was coming. One evening, while Josh was working late in his home office, Sarah knocked on the door. She peeked her head in, hesitant, holding 2 mugs of steaming tea. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. Josh leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. "About what?" She stepped inside, setting 1 mug on the desk in front of him. "About us. About everything." Josh sighed, gesturing for her to sit. "Go ahead," he said, crossing his arms. "I ended things with Eric," she began, her voice trembling. "I told him it was a mistake, that I wanted to focus on fixing our marriage." Josh studied her, searching her face for any sign of sincerity. "And you expect me to just believe that? After months of lies?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I know I don't deserve your trust right now, but I'm trying, Josh. I want to make this work." "Why now?" Josh asked, his voice colder than he intended. "Because you got caught? Or because you actually realized what you've done?" Sarah flinched at his words but didn't look away. "Because I love you," she said quietly. "Because I don't want to lose what we've built." Josh laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "What we've built? You mean the lies? The betrayal? The family you were willing to throw away for what? Excitement?" "It wasn't like that," Sarah pleaded. "I felt lost, disconnected. I made a terrible mistake, but it doesn't mean I stopped loving you." Josh stood abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. He paced the room, his hands clenched into fists. "You don't do this to someone you love, Sarah. You don't tear their heart out and then expect everything to go back to normal." "I'm not asking for normal," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm asking for a chance to prove to you that I can be better, that we can be better." Josh stopped pacing, turning to face her. "Do you even realize what you've done? How you've made me feel? I can't sleep. I can't eat. Every time I close my eyes, I see you with him. I hear your lies over and over again." Sarah stood, reaching for him, but he stepped back. "Josh." "No," he said firmly. "I need space. I need time to figure out if this is even worth saving." The following days were a blur of pain and avoidance. Josh spent most of his time at work or out of the house, while Sarah busied herself with chores and errands, desperate to prove her commitment. But the distance between them only grew. One night, Josh found himself sitting in his car outside Eric's house again. He wasn't sure why he was there. Maybe curiosity, maybe anger, or maybe just a need for closure. The lights inside were on, and through the window, he saw Eric alone, pacing with a phone pressed to his ear. Josh imagined him talking to Sarah, trying to win her back. The thought made his blood boil. Unable to stop himself, Josh got out of the car and approached the front door. Before he could think better of it, he knocked. The sound echoed in the quiet night. Eric opened the door, his face registering surprise, then confusion. "Josh." Josh's jaw tightened. "We need to talk." Eric hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if considering whether to let him in. Finally, he stepped aside. "Come in." The inside of the house was modern, almost clinical, with sharp lines and minimal decor. It felt cold, impersonal. Nothing like the home Josh and Sarah had created together. "What do you want?" Eric asked, crossing his arms. Josh stared at him, trying to keep his emotions in check. "I want to know why. Why her? Why my wife?" Eric's expression hardened. "You think I planned this? That I set out to ruin your marriage?" "I don't know what to think anymore," Josh admitted. "All I know is that you crossed a line." Eric sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I didn't mean for this to happen. It just did. We connected. She was unhappy. I didn't know how deep it went until it was too late." Josh's hands curled into fists at his sides. "Too late? You knew she was married. You knew she had a family. And so did she." Eric shot back. "Don't put all of this on me. I didn't force her into anything." The words hit Josh like a punch to the gut. As much as he wanted to blame Eric for everything, he knew the responsibility didn't lie with him alone. Sarah had made her choices just as Eric had. "This ends now," Josh said, his voice low and firm. "Whatever you think you had with her, it's over." "It already is," Eric replied, his tone bitter. "She made that clear." Josh stared at him for a moment longer, then turned and walked out without another word. The confrontation hadn't given him the satisfaction he'd hoped for, but it had solidified one thing in his mind. He couldn't keep living like this. Back at home, Josh began taking steps to regain control of his life. He started seeing a therapist regularly, not just for himself, but to figure out how to navigate the complicated web of emotions surrounding Sarah and their son, Max. During one session, his therapist asked, "What do you want, Josh?" "Not for Sarah, not for Max, for you." Josh sat in silence for a long time, grappling with the question. "I want peace," he finally said. "I want to feel like myself again." His therapist nodded. "Then you need to decide what that looks like. Does it mean forgiving Sarah and rebuilding your marriage? Or does it mean letting go and starting over?" Sarah, meanwhile, was doing everything she could to win Josh back. She attended counseling sessions, wrote him letters apologizing for her actions, and even suggested renewing their vows as a way to start fresh. But Josh couldn't bring himself to agree. The wounds were too fresh, the trust too broken. One evening, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table, Sarah broke the silence. "I miss us," she said quietly. "Don't you?" Josh looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I miss what we used to be, but I don't know if we can ever be that again." "We can try," Sarah said, her voice filled with desperation. "We owe it to Max, if nothing else." Josh's jaw clenched. "I won't stay in a broken marriage just for him. That's not the example I want to set." "So that's it?" Sarah asked, tears streaming down her face. "You're just giving up?" "I'm not giving up," Josh replied. "I'm choosing to move forward, with or without you." The tension reached its peak during a heated argument one night. Sarah accused Josh of being emotionally unavailable, of pushing her away even before the affair. Josh fired back, listing every lie, every betrayal, every moment she'd chosen Eric over their family. By the end of it, both were left emotionally drained, the room echoing with the silence that followed their shouting. "I can't do this anymore," Josh said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to let go." Sarah collapsed onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I'm so sorry." But Josh didn't respond. He walked upstairs to the guest room, closing the door behind him. It was the first time he truly felt alone, but it was also the first step toward reclaiming his life. Stay tuned for the next part, where we'll see how Josh navigates life after betrayal and whether he can find the closure he desperately needs. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more stories like this. Share your thoughts below. Do you think Josh should forgive Sarah? Or is it time for him to move on? As the days turned into weeks, Josh felt the pressure of his decision mounting. Sarah's attempts to reconcile became more desperate, and her every action seemed designed to remind him of the life they had built together. But for Josh, the memories were a double-edged sword, each happy moment now tainted by the betrayal that had shattered his trust. One Saturday morning, as Josh sat in the living room with Max, trying to focus on the board game they were playing, Sarah entered with a determined expression. She held a folder in her hands, her grip so tight that her knuckles were white. "We need to talk," she said, her voice firm but calm. Josh glanced at Max, who was oblivious to the tension, and sighed. "Not now, Sarah." "Yes, now," she insisted, sitting across from him. "Max, sweetheart, why don't you go play in your room for a little while? Mom and Dad need to talk." Max hesitated, looking between them, sensing the tension. "Okay," he said reluctantly, gathering his pieces and trudging upstairs. Once he was out of earshot, Josh leaned back, arms crossed. "What's this about?" Sarah placed the folder on the coffee table and slid it toward him. "I've been working with a counselor. I wrote everything down. Everything I've been feeling, everything I've done. I want you to read it." Josh eyed the folder like it was a ticking time bomb. "What good is that going to do, Sarah?" "I want you to understand," she said, her voice breaking. "I need you to understand why I did what I did. Not to excuse it, but so you'll know it wasn't about you. It was about me." Josh stared at her, his jaw tightening. He wanted to throw the folder back at her, to tell her that no amount of explanation could justify what she'd done. But a part of him, however small, was curious. He reached for the folder, opening it cautiously. Inside was a handwritten letter several pages long. The words blurred together at first, but as he began to read, they came into focus. Sarah's letter detailed her feelings of isolation, her struggles with self-worth, and her growing resentment over the years. She wrote about how she had felt invisible in their marriage, how Eric had made her feel seen and valued in a way she hadn't felt in years. By the time he finished, Josh felt a mixture of anger and sadness. He folded the letter and set it back in the folder, his expression unreadable. "So that's it?" he asked, his voice cold. "You were unhappy, so you decided to destroy everything we had instead of talking to me about it?" "I didn't know how to talk to you," Sarah admitted, tears streaming down her face. "Every time I tried, it felt like you weren't really listening, like you were too busy with work, with Max, with everything else." Josh stood abruptly, pacing the room. "Do you have any idea how hard I worked to give you this life? To make sure you never had to worry about anything? And this is how you repay me?" "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Sarah said, standing as well. "I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can be better, that we can be better." Josh turned to face her, his eyes filled with pain. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Sarah. And without trust, what do we have?" The tension between them reached a boiling point that night. After hours of avoiding each other, they finally sat down in the kitchen, the clock ticking loudly in the silence. "You keep saying you don't know if you can trust me," Sarah said quietly, staring at her hands. "But you haven't even tried. You're not giving us a chance." Josh's fist clenched around the glass of water in his hand. "Why should I? You made a choice, Sarah. A choice that broke everything we built together. How am I supposed to just move past that?" "Because we have a family," she shouted, standing up. "Because we owe it to Max to at least try." Josh slammed his glass down on the table, water splashing onto the surface. "No, we owe it to Max to show him what a healthy relationship looks like. And this isn't it." Sarah's face crumpled, and she sank back into her chair, sobbing. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Josh looked at her, his heart aching despite his anger. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay. But he couldn't. Not anymore. The next day, Josh made an appointment with his therapist to discuss what had happened. "I feel like I'm trapped," he admitted, his voice heavy. "I can't stay, but I can't leave either. I don't want to hurt Max, but I can't keep living like this." His therapist nodded, her expression compassionate. "It's a difficult position, Josh, but you need to remember that taking care of yourself is just as important as taking care of Max. You can't be the father he needs if you're constantly carrying this weight." As the days went on, Josh began to take small steps toward clarity. He spent more time with Max, focusing on their bond and making sure his son felt loved and supported. He also started to confide in close friends, something he hadn't done before. Their support gave him strength, reminding him that he wasn't alone. Sarah, meanwhile, continued to work on herself. She attended counseling sessions, read books on relationships and personal growth, and made an effort to be more present in their day-to-day lives. But no matter how hard she tried, the distance between them remained. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Sarah turned to Josh. "Do you think we'll ever get back to what we had?" Josh stared at her for a long moment before shaking his head. "I don't know, Sarah. I really don't." Stay tuned for the next part, where we'll see how Josh navigates the decision to stay or leave and what it means for his family. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more stories like this. Let us know your thoughts. Can a marriage survive betrayal, or is it better to start fresh? As the weeks passed, the fragile equilibrium in the house began to falter. Josh had been distant but polite, trying to shield Max from the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed determined to repair the broken pieces of their relationship, clinging to every chance to show she could change. Yet, the weight of the secrets they carried was like a ticking time bomb, one that would eventually explode. One evening, Josh returned home from work to find Sarah sitting at the dining table, her face pale and tense. She had the same folder from weeks ago in front of her, but this time there was something else. A set of printed emails. Josh froze in the doorway, sensing the shift in the air. "What's this?" he asked cautiously, his eyes narrowing. Sarah looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "I found something. Something you need to see." Josh's stomach twisted as she slid the emails across the table. He picked them up, scanning the contents quickly. They were messages between Sarah and Eric, dated months ago, long before their affair had come to light. The tone was casual at first, but it quickly turned intimate. Plans for secret meetings, declarations of love, even discussions about a potential future together. His hands trembled as he dropped the papers onto the table. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because I want you to know everything," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "I've been hiding so much, and it's killing me. If there's any chance of fixing this, I need to be honest." Josh stared at her, his mind racing. "And you think this confession will help? That seeing all of this will somehow make me want to forgive you?" "No," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "But I couldn't keep lying anymore." The revelation opened the floodgates. Josh unleashed months of pent-up anger, hurt, and betrayal, his words cutting like knives. He accused her of destroying their family, of being selfish and ungrateful, of making him question every moment they'd shared. Sarah didn't fight back. She sat there, absorbing his words like blows, her head bowed in shame. "You don't get to play the victim here," Josh spat. "You did this. You made these choices. And now you expect me to just, what? Pretend it never happened." "I don't expect anything," Sarah said quietly. "I just needed you to know the truth." Josh shook his head, laughing bitterly. "The truth? The truth is, I don't even know who you are anymore." The argument left them both emotionally drained. Josh retreated to the guest room, slamming the door behind him. Sarah stayed in the dining room, staring at the pile of emails and the wreckage of their lives. Later that night, unable to sleep, Josh opened his laptop and began writing. It wasn't a letter or a diary entry, just a stream of consciousness, a way to process the chaos in his mind. As he wrote, he realized something that made his chest tighten. No matter how much he loved the life they'd built, it was gone, irrevocably. The next morning, Josh woke to find Sarah sitting on the couch with Max, helping him with his homework. The sight tugged at his heart, a painful reminder of what was at stake. Max looked up and grinned when he saw Josh. "Dad, can we play soccer after breakfast?" Josh hesitated, glancing at Sarah, who quickly looked away. "Yeah, buddy. Of course." As they played in the yard, Josh watched Max's carefree laughter and felt a pang of guilt. How much longer could he keep up this facade? How long until the cracks in their family became impossible to hide? That afternoon, Josh received an unexpected call from his therapist. She had a cancellation and offered to fit him in for a session. Desperate for clarity, he agreed. Sitting in the familiar office, he poured out everything. Sarah's confession, the emails, his own feelings of betrayal and doubt. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. "Part of me wants to leave to start over. But then I think about Max and I can't." His therapist nodded thoughtfully. "It's a complicated situation, Josh. But remember, staying for Max's sake only works if it's a healthy environment. If you and Sarah can't rebuild trust, it's better to show him that it's okay to walk away from something that's no longer working." That evening, Josh and Sarah had another confrontation. This time quieter but no less intense. Sarah asked him point-blank what he wanted, to try to fix their marriage or to end it. "I don't know," Josh said honestly. "I need more time." Sarah nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "Take all the time you need. Just, please don't shut me out." The turning point came a week later. Josh received an email from Eric, the man who had upended his life. The subject line was simple, an apology. Against his better judgment, Josh opened it. The email was long and filled with apologies, explanations, and justifications. Eric claimed he had never intended to hurt anyone, that his feelings for Sarah had been real, but he admitted that what they had done was wrong. He ended the message by saying he was moving out of town and hoped Josh could find it in his heart to forgive Sarah, if not him. Josh stared at the screen, anger bubbling to the surface. Who was Eric to tell him what to do? To try and absolve himself with a few hollow words? But as the anger subsided, Josh felt something else. Clarity. This wasn't about Eric or even Sarah anymore. It was about him, what he wanted, what he needed to move forward. That night, Josh sat Sarah down in the living room. The house was quiet, Max already asleep upstairs. "I've made a decision," he said, his voice steady. Sarah's eyes filled with fear, but she nodded, bracing herself. "We need to separate," Josh said. "I can't keep living like this, Sarah. It's not fair to either of us. And it's definitely not fair to Max." Sarah broke down, sobbing into her hands. "Josh, please, don't do this. This isn't just about what you did," Josh continued, his voice soft but firm. "It's about what I need to heal, and I can't do that while we're still together." As the reality of his decision sank in, Sarah begged him to reconsider, to give her one more chance. But Josh remained resolute. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of peace, a certainty that he was doing the right thing. Stay tuned for the next part, where we'll see how Josh navigates the challenges of co-parenting, rebuilding his life, and finding closure. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more heartfelt stories like this one. Let us know in the comments. Do you think Josh made the right decision, or should he have tried to work things out? The tension in the Mitchell household was now at its breaking point. Every interaction between Josh and Sarah felt like a careful dance around an emotional minefield. Despite agreeing to separate, Josh hadn't moved out yet, primarily for Max's sake. The idea of packing his things and explaining to his son why he was leaving loomed over him like a storm cloud. A few days after Josh made his decision, Sarah came to him with a proposition. She suggested attending family counseling, not to repair their marriage, but to establish a healthier dynamic for co-parenting Max. "I know it's over for us," she said, her voice trembling, "but I don't want Max to suffer because of my mistakes. If we can at least show him we're still a team when it comes to him, maybe this won't hurt as much." Josh hesitated. He was still angry, still hurt, but he had to admit she was right. They couldn't let their son become collateral damage in their broken relationship. "Fine," he said finally, "but this doesn't change anything between us." Sarah nodded, a glimmer of hope flickering in her eyes. "I understand." Their first counseling session was tense and awkward. The therapist, Dr. Lane, was a calm, middle-aged woman with a soothing voice and a knack for cutting through the tension in the room. "You've been through a lot, both of you," she said, her gaze shifting between them. "But today isn't about assigning blame. It's about figuring out how to move forward for Max's sake." Josh crossed his arms, his body language defensive. "I just want to make sure he's okay. That's all I care about." "And you, Sarah?" Dr. Lane asked. Sarah hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. "I want the same. I know I've made mistakes. Huge mistakes. But Max deserves the best from both of us." The session forced them to confront hard truths. Josh admitted he'd been emotionally distant at times, burying himself in work and ignoring signs that their marriage was falling apart. Sarah acknowledged that instead of addressing her feelings, she'd taken the cowardly way out by seeking validation elsewhere. "It doesn't excuse what I did," she said, her voice breaking. "But I need you to know, I never stopped loving you." Josh looked away, his jaw tightening. "It doesn't matter anymore." After the session, they drove home in silence, the air between them heavy with unresolved emotions. Max, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in his family, greeted them with a wide grin when they walked through the door. "Hey, Mom. Hey, Dad. Look what I made." He held up a drawing of their family, all three of them holding hands and smiling under a bright sun. Josh's heart broke a little as he took the picture. "This is amazing, buddy," he said, forcing a smile. "We'll hang it on the fridge." As Max ran off to play, Sarah leaned against the counter, her eyes glassy. "How do we tell him?" she whispered. Josh sighed. I don't know, but we'll figure it out. Together. The following week, Josh began searching for apartments. It was a bittersweet process. He found himself torn between excitement for a fresh start and sadness at leaving the home where they'd built so many memories. He toured several places but struggled to find one that felt right. It wasn't just about finding a space for himself. He needed a place where Max would feel comfortable too. One afternoon, while flipping through listings, Josh received a call from his sister, Emily. She had been a sounding board for him throughout the ordeal, offering advice and a listening ear whenever he needed it. "How's the search going?" she asked. "Slow," Josh admitted. "Nothing feels right." "Maybe nothing will feel right at first," Emily said gently. "But this isn't permanent. It's just a step forward. And Max will adjust as long as you're there for him." Her words gave Josh some perspective. He realized he was holding himself to an impossible standard, trying to create the perfect situation in an inherently imperfect time. Meanwhile, Sarah seemed to be making an effort to change. She'd started therapy on her own and was more present with Max than Josh had seen her in years. While he appreciated her efforts, it didn't soften the walls he'd built around his heart. The damage was too deep, the betrayal too personal. One evening, Josh caught Sarah standing in the hallway, staring at a framed photo of their wedding day. He paused, unsure whether to walk away or confront her. "I was so happy that day," she said quietly, her back to him. "I really thought we'd make it through anything." Josh leaned against the doorframe, his voice cold but calm. "So did I." She turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" Josh looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Maybe, but not today." The turning point came 2 weeks later. Josh found a small but cozy apartment in a family-friendly neighborhood, not far from Max's school. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like a fresh start. He signed the lease and began the slow process of moving out. The night before he left, Josh sat Max down for a heart-to-heart. He'd rehearsed what to say a dozen times, but now that the moment had arrived, the words stuck in his throat. "Max, buddy," he began, his voice trembling. "I need to talk to you about something important." Max looked up from his toys, his big, innocent eyes full of curiosity. "What is it, Dad?" Josh took a deep breath. "Mom and we've decided that I'm going to live in a different house for a while." Max frowned, his small brow furrowing. "Why? Did I do something wrong?" Josh's heart shattered. "No, Max, this isn't your fault. Mom and I just need some space right now, but we both love you so much. That will never change." "Will I still see you?" Max asked, his voice small. "Of course," Josh said, pulling him into a hug. "You'll see me all the time, and you'll have your own room at my new place, with all your favorite things." Max nodded against his chest, his arms wrapping tightly around his father. "Okay." The day Josh moved out was filled with mixed emotions. As he packed the last of his things into his car, Sarah stood in the doorway, watching silently. When he turned to say goodbye, she stepped forward. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "I'm sorry. For everything." Josh nodded, his expression unreadable. "Take care of yourself, Sarah." And with that, he drove away, leaving behind the house they'd once called home. Weeks after Josh moved into his new apartment, he began settling into his new routine. Max adapted quickly, alternating weekends and weeknights between his parents. Despite the separation, Josh made sure to create a welcoming space for his son. The small apartment soon felt like a home filled with Max's laughter and their shared moments of bonding. But the scars of betrayal lingered for Josh. No matter how hard he tried to focus on moving forward, the memory of Sarah's infidelity remained fresh. Questions he hadn't allowed himself to ask before began creeping into his thoughts. Why had she done it? Was it really just a moment of weakness? Or was there more to the story? One afternoon, while cleaning out some old files, Josh stumbled upon a folder Sarah had accidentally packed with his belongings. Inside were receipts, printed emails, and an itinerary for a trip she'd taken the previous summer. What struck him as odd was that she had claimed this trip was for a work conference, yet none of the documents included her employer's logo or any mention of her job. Josh's chest tightened as he scanned the papers. The name of a boutique hotel appeared multiple times, along with a charge for a couple's massage. His blood boiled. He was no longer angry just about her betrayal. He was furious that she had been so careless, so brazen, as if she'd never expected to get caught. That evening, Josh called his sister Emily. He rarely discussed Sarah with her anymore, but this time he needed advice. "I found these receipts," he began, pacing his living room. "They're from last summer, for a trip she said was a work thing. But it's obvious now it wasn't." Emily sighed on the other end of the line. "What are you planning to do with them?" "I don't know," Josh admitted. "Part of me wants to confront her, to throw it all in her face and make her feel the weight of what she's done. But another part of me thinks it's pointless." Emily's voice softened. "Josh, I know you're hurting, and you have every right to be angry, but you've already started moving on. Do you really want to drag yourself back into her lies?" Josh rubbed his temples. "Maybe not, but I deserve the truth." A week later, Josh decided to address the issue, but not with Sarah. Instead, he reached out to one of her closest friends, Rachel. Rachel had always been more loyal to Sarah, but Josh knew she had a good heart and might offer him the closure he needed. They met at a local cafe, the tension palpable as they sat across from each other. "I appreciate you meeting me," Josh said, his tone calm but firm. Rachel nodded cautiously. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Josh pulled out the folder and placed it on the table. "I need to know if you knew about this." Rachel's eyes widened as she glanced at the receipts. Her hesitation spoke volumes, and Josh's stomach churned. "Josh," she began, her voice heavy with guilt. "I didn't want to be involved. But yes, I knew." Her admission hit him like a punch to the gut. He leaned back in his chair, struggling to compose himself. "How long?" Rachel hesitated again. "About a year." The revelation shattered any lingering hope Josh had of finding a reasonable explanation for Sarah's actions. She hadn't just made one mistake. This had been a prolonged betrayal, carefully hidden behind lies and deceit. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rachel looked down at her hands. "I didn't think it was my place. And honestly, I thought she'd stop. She always said she still loved you." Josh scoffed bitterly. "Love? She doesn't know the meaning of the word." Rachel reached across the table, her expression earnest. "Josh, I'm not excusing what she did, but I think part of her felt trapped, like she didn't know how to fix what was broken between you two." Josh shook his head. "No, she wasn't trapped. She made choices, and now she has to live with them." That night, Josh confronted Sarah. He didn't want to fight, he just wanted answers. "Why didn't you just leave me if you were so unhappy?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with pain. Sarah stood in the doorway of his apartment, guilt written all over her face. "I didn't want to destroy our family," she said quietly. "I thought I could figure out a way to make things right without losing everything." Josh laughed bitterly. "Well, congratulations. You managed to destroy it anyway." She reached out to him, but he stepped back. "Josh, I know I can't fix this, but I'm sorry. For everything." He shook his head. "Sorry doesn't erase what you did. It doesn't undo the lies or the nights I spent wondering what I did wrong." In the weeks that followed, Josh focused on healing. He threw himself into his work, spent quality time with Max, and even started attending a support group for people recovering from infidelity. The group sessions were both painful and cathartic, giving him a sense of community he hadn't realized he needed. One evening, a woman in the group shared her story of rebuilding her life after a similar betrayal. Her words struck a chord with Josh. "It's not about forgetting what happened," she said. "It's about learning to live again, to trust yourself, and to open your heart to new possibilities." Josh realized that, while he might never forgive Sarah, he couldn't let her actions define the rest of his life. He deserved happiness, and so did Max. As Josh continued to rebuild his life, he found himself reflecting on what he truly wanted moving forward. He didn't want to carry the bitterness of the past into his future. He wanted to be the best father he could be and, someday, maybe even find love again, with someone who valued honesty and loyalty as much as he did. Months had passed since Josh's world had been turned upside down. Life had become a blend of small victories and ongoing challenges. But through it all, he had begun to reclaim his sense of self. The betrayal that had once consumed him no longer felt like an open wound. Instead, it was a scar, visible but no longer painful, a reminder of the strength he had found within himself. Josh and Sarah's divorce was finalized on a rainy Tuesday morning. The courtroom was quiet, the proceedings clinical and efficient. Sarah had signed the papers with little resistance, perhaps realizing there was no point in fighting what was already lost. As they left the courthouse, she lingered near the exit, her umbrella hanging loosely in her hand. "Josh," she began, her voice hesitant, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope someday you'll find it in your heart to let go of the anger." Josh paused, the rain pattering softly around them. He met her gaze, his own steady but devoid of malice. "I already have," he said, "but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just means I'm done letting this define me." Sarah nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered one last time before walking away, disappearing into the gray afternoon. For Josh, the moment was bittersweet. He didn't feel triumphant or vindicated, just free. Back home, Max's laughter echoed through the apartment as they built a fort out of pillows and blankets in the living room. Josh had made it a priority to create as many joyful memories as possible with his son, determined to shield him from the weight of the past. "Dad, can we sleep in the fort tonight?" Max asked, his eyes wide with excitement. Josh grinned. "Of course, buddy. But you'll have to help me make it super cozy." Max's giggles were infectious as they added string lights and threw in extra cushions. In moments like these, Josh realized he hadn't just lost something when his marriage ended. He'd gained clarity about what truly mattered. Max was his anchor, his reason to keep going, and Josh was committed to being the best father he could be. Over time, Josh also began to open himself up to the possibility of new relationships. It wasn't easy. Trust was something he had to rebuild, not just in others but in himself. He started small, accepting invitations to social events and reconnecting with old friends. Slowly, he allowed himself to believe that not everyone would betray him, that there were people out there capable of genuine love and loyalty. One evening, while attending a coworker's birthday party, he struck up a conversation with a woman named Claire. She was smart, funny, and unpretentious, and their conversation flowed effortlessly. They talked about everything from their favorite childhood cartoons to their shared love of hiking. "You know," Claire said with a teasing smile, "if you ever want a hiking buddy, I'm your girl. But fair warning, I'm terrible with directions." Josh chuckled. "Good thing I'm great with maps. We might make a good team." The two exchanged numbers, and over the following weeks they began spending time together. Their connection felt natural, unforced. Claire didn't try to pry into Josh's past, but she listened with genuine empathy when he chose to share pieces of it. For the first time in a long while, Josh felt a spark of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, he could love again. Meanwhile, Sarah's life had taken a different turn. The affair that had cost her so much eventually fizzled out, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone. She tried to rebuild her relationship with Max, but the boy was perceptive, and he often asked questions that Sarah struggled to answer. "Why don't you and Dad live together anymore?" he asked one evening during dinner. Sarah hesitated, her heart aching at the innocence in his voice. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, Max, and sometimes those mistakes mean they can't stay together. But no matter what, both your dad and I love you very much." Max nodded thoughtfully, his young mind processing her words. "Dad's really good at building forts," he said after a moment, his tone wistful. Sarah smiled faintly. "He is, and he loves spending time with you. That's what matters most." For Josh, the final chapter of this painful journey came during an unexpected moment of clarity. While cleaning out a box of old photos, he stumbled upon a picture of him and Sarah on their wedding day. They were both laughing, their faces full of hope for the future. Instead of feeling sadness or anger, Josh felt something different. Gratitude. That version of him, the one in the photo, had loved deeply and without reservation. And while that love had been betrayed, it had also taught him valuable lessons about resilience, self-worth, and the importance of cherishing the relationships that truly mattered. He placed the photo back in the box, sealing it shut and tucking it away in a closet. It wasn't a part of his life he needed to revisit often, but it was a chapter he no longer feared. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, Josh and Max stood at the edge of a trailhead, backpacks slung over their shoulders. Claire was there too, her face lit up with excitement. "Ready to conquer this mountain?" she asked, adjusting her hat. Josh smiled, glancing down at Max, who was already marching ahead. "Ready as we'll ever be." As they started the hike, Josh felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. The weight of the past was still there, but it no longer defined him. With each step, he moved closer to a future filled with possibility, hope, and love. Not just for others, but for himself. Thank you for following this journey with Josh. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful tales of resilience and redemption. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to share more stories with you soon.